Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the Lawrence County Museum and especially to one of our, we think, fabulous events related to Black history in Lawrence County and across the nation. We are delighted to have you with us tonight and hope this won't be the first time if it is your first time. I do want to mention that we have our exhibit hall open, so if you would like to take some time after the lecture to visit our exhibit halls, and in particular, our new Black History exhibit. We're very proud of it. Our committee worked very hard on it, and it's really just the first phase of it. Do we have any of our committee members here? I see Deb and Elma, and yeah, they did a fabulous job. We had a wonderful opening on Saturday, and can't wait to keep it going. Just want to tell you just what's coming up. Just a few things. You can check our website. We always have things going on here. Don't just think, came tonight, that's all I need to do, because we always have lots of things coming up. Our exhibit halls change, too. Maybe not everything all at once, but just because you come one month doesn't mean you wouldn't find something different the next month. So I hope that you'll be able to join us this Sunday, February 23rd at 3 p.m. for a musical visit to Days of Old. It's going to be a presentation of Negro spirituals, common meter music, slavery hymns, and more. And our special guests for that program are Harold Ligon, Laurel Hill Baptist Church, and Smyrna AME Church. And it is free to everyone. We also are having a special tour of the Piney Grove School. It's located now at the Culbertson Backcountry Settlement, and there will be a tour. Now, you can go by there and see the outside just about any time you want to, but if you'd like to see the inside, it will be open on March the 15th at 1 o'clock. So please join us for that tour also. So I would like to take this time to introduce Dr. Kendra Hamilton. She's a native of Charleston, South Carolina, with deep roots in the Greenwood County hamlet of 96. She was educated at Duke University, Louisiana State University, and the University of Virginia. She is a poet, essayist, and scholar of the literature and culture of the South, and currently serves as an assistant professor of English and director of Southern Studies at Presbyterian College. Her works have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. I'm going to put a copy of her more extensive bio on that table. Actually, there are two copies over there. Her poetry collection, The Goddess of Gumbo, was published in 2006. And a work of literary criticism, Romancing the Gullah, is forthcoming from the University of Georgia Press. She is recipient of numerous fellowships, including the Rockefeller Foundation and the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation. Dr. Hamilton has a long track record of artistic and scholarly work in the public interest. She worked with the Spoleto Festival, USA, places with a future artist collaboration on a series of projects highlighting the intersection of race and ecology in Charleston's embattled Gullah Geechee communities, and also served as poetry curator for the Zoll Neal Hurston Festival in Eatonville, Florida. She was the first Black woman elected to city council and served as vice mayor in Charlottesville, Virginia, working on projects such as the redevelopment of historic Jefferson School as an African-American cultural center, and founded the Bread and Roses Initiative, a pioneer in the Virginia food justice movement. In Clinton, aren't we lucky to have her here in Lawrence County? In Clinton, Dr. Hamilton chaired the committee that hosted a racial reconciliation dinner, the Nat Fuller Feast, to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. In addition to her teaching at Presbyterian College, Dr. Hamilton led the team that won $100,000 Digital Humanities Grant from the Andrew Mellon Foundation. She serves as principal investigator for the Textile Memory Project, a public history initiative that will involve digitization of fragile archival resources, photo documentation, and GIS mapping of former mill sites and communities, and the collecting of oral histories. And we're going to be talking to you because we're going to have a mill exhibit later this year. We'll use anybody we can. I must tell you that so you have more time with her and less of me, I have significantly condensed Dr. Hamilton's biographical information.
Yes, please.
She has quite a resume of important work that I'm sure you will be interested to read. And there are 2 copies over there. So if you have time afterwards, please pick it up. Thank you, Dr. Hamilton.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I don't even know what to say, but I do want to say thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. It's great to see so many faces. You know, on a Tuesday evening, you know, in the middle of, you know, cold weather. So it's great to see familiar faces and hope to meet new friends. And I will say that the book is actually out. It's not forthcoming. It's forthcoming on the table. So there are a few copies. And if you're not able to get a copy this evening, my publisher will be providing a QR code. So anybody who puts their name down on a list tonight will be able to get a discount and on their copy, you know. So, yeah, I'll just get started. So this talk is called, well, I'll just get started. I've been living here and teaching at PC since 2014. And during most of that time, I think I have been working on this book. It was complete when I got here, but of course, I had to place it with a publisher, I had to rewrite it, and I did all of that here while I was living in Lawrence County. So again, thankful to you for coming out and joining me for this conversation during Black History Month. A little bit of background, I'm a professor now, but when I was a kid, I was that weird kid who always had my head stuck in a book. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love people, but I was a bookworm. Books were sort of like my world. I was that kid who lived in her imagination. And so this is the book that I wish had been around when I was a kid, trying to figure out who I was and where I belonged and where, you know, me and my family fit in the world. And so I wrote this book for the moms of girls like me and for the teachers of girls like me and all the people who, you know, who might be inspired to make art about the places that they come from and the people that they come from through reading a book like this one. But I figured that the people in the upstate would need a little bit more of an introduction to, you know, Gullah culture and Gullah Geechee stuff. So this is what I prepared today is really a little bit of a teaser, a taster. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the Gullah Geechee world. And then we can, you know, as we, you know, draw it to the close, we can talk a little bit about the book and what the content of the book is. So this talk is called Body and Soul, America's Foundations and the Gullah Geechee Story. And I'm focusing on foundations because Gullah Geechee people are foundational to the nation. There was a study that was done in 1974, and when I read the statistic, it utterly floored me, that 25% of the native-born population, native-born African-American population of the United States could trace their lineage to the port of Charleston. 25%. Millions and millions and millions of people, right? So that introduced me to the concept of foundational cultures. And so as it turns out, even though we tend to think of African American identity as, it's this thing, it's a kind of a monolith, they're black people, they've always been here, like since the beginning. And they're just, but what actually, scholarship teaches us is that there are actually 3 original cultures that were foundational to the development of the United States. So I wanted to include this map and this man. This man is W.E.B. Du Bois, who, Dr. Ingram could tell us a lot about Dr. Du Bois, right? He was one of the first people African Americans to graduate from Harvard College, got his PhD from the University of Heidelberg in German, basically was one of the people who pioneered the discipline of sociology. His sociological studies of the Georgia Negro, which he conducted in the early 1900s while he was a faculty member at Atlanta University, are still considered very important. And this little map here was something that he created for the Paris Exposition in 1900, the Negro exhibit in the American exhibit for the Paris Exposition. And what it shows is the roots of importation from Africa to the Americas. And we have much more sensitive and nuanced schematics now. The Schomburg Center in Harlem has this amazing sort of, digital map that actually can show you all the slave voyages in time. And it's astonishing to sort of like look at. But he's got 3 lines coming from Africa to America. And those 3 lines are faint and hard to see and show us the 3 foundational cultures. So the thing to think about is that these 3 original places on the map were a crucible of genetic and cultural mixing. People from 3 different continents with vastly different ways, but also a common humanity coming together and creating a new identity. So these 3 places, let's talk about where they are. The first is obviously Virginia, the Chesapeake region, right? So 1619, a ship, the White Lion, arrives at Point Comfort in Jamestown, and with 22 Africans on board. And this is the original, this is the moment, the originary moment where African people enter the American story, right? Let's see, the interesting thing about this population is it is the Chesapeake region and parts north, right? So the interesting thing about this region is that it was the first to become Creole, fully Creole, acculturated, to create a new identity. They were, the end of the slave trade in 1808 severed this population from its African roots. And so it went on to develop from the Chesapeake region through New Jersey up through the Northeast, a distinctive sort of northern African American identity. Let's see, anything else I wanted to say about this? Yeah, that's fine. So that's the first of the original cultures, the Chesapeake originals. The third original culture, and we're talking about in time, because this culture is established in about 1710. So the third is actually the most recognizable, and these are the Delta originals, the cultures that are around, that entered through the port of New Orleans and that populated the cotton farms of the Mississippi Delta, north to Arkansas and west to California. So like I said, this process started in 1710. Roughly a century after the cultures of the Chesapeake were established. But these original cultures were constantly refreshed by illegal slave trading, which continued almost up to the beginning of the Civil War, and also by constant infusion of people and cultures from the Caribbean. There's constant exchange between the Caribbean and even in Mexico with this region. This region is had the happy coincidence of being that the enslaved were allowed to keep their drums. In South Carolina and Georgia, drums were banned after the Stono Rebellion. So this thing of being able to keep their drums, the Catholic Church didn't care if these people, met in the squares and drummed and danced all Sunday, on their days off. It was like, you guys knock yourselves out, you deserve a little time off. So their culture was exuberant, lively, and we still see it today in like Mardi Gras parades, second lines in New Orleans. There's this wonderful exuberance, and when you are there, you feel yourself in the presence of something that just feels so unique and so uniquely American, and yet you feel like you can be a part of it too. That's that feeling of, the original. You're in touch with that original essence of a Mother Africa on American soil. Interestingly, let's see, come on. So that brings us to the third, which is actually the middle child. We are the Gullah Geechee cultures of the South Carolina, Georgia Lowcountry, are the most influential of these original cultures because we are the largest, right? That's where that 1 in 4, native-born African Americans statistic comes from. We were the largest by numbers. And so, but we're also in many ways the most unknowable. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The Gullah Geechee culture's role is misunderstood in American culture, partly because they had to guard their secrets so hard against white intrusion. Those stats on rice production, which I'm about to, show to you, are achieved by human trafficking on a scale that it is difficult for us to imagine, right? So, but with reprisals that this population is subject to after the Stono Rebellion, after Denmark Vesey's revolt, after their active involvement during the Civil War in providing assistance to Northern troops, this just inculcates in the community a habit of secrecy, which they are able to do by hiding behind their language, right? This Creole language that the Gullah Geechee people were able to create because of their numbers on these large, rice plantations in the Low Country, some of which had 400, 600 people, enslaved on them. And they lived in counties that were 80, 90% black. The only white person you might see might be your overseer and your overseer's family, and the owner of the plantation a couple of times a year, right? So these people were able to piece together, everybody was from different tribes, but they were able to create a Creole language with pieces of everybody's languages, including English. English is mostly vocabulary. The syntactic structure, the grammar is West African, which accounts for why Gullah Geechee is different from regular Black vernacular speech, sort of like, youth, slang or, African American slang speech. It's different because the structure is recognizably still West African. So they're able to recreate the language, and they're also, because their lives in the New World revolve around the production of rice, which is something that they did in their homes in West Africa. They're able to recreate many of the rituals and just the culture, more or less intact. They have to, make adaptations. They can't do everything in exactly the same form, but it's still this very, very Africanized culture, right, that they create. And and here's the thing, this becomes a sort of language, the lingua franca of the Low Country. White people are like native speakers of Gullah too during this colonial period. So that's why it's interesting. Gullah Geechee culture is based on language, being able to speak the language, right? Being familiarity with that language. It's also based on your landscape. It grows only in this place. you know, the Low Country, the Gullah Geechee, and also lineage. You know, you have to have family lineage, a Creole lineage, right? You know, mixtures of all these different African cultures together, cross-pollinating occasionally with European and definitely with Native American, depending on, you know, the time and the place. But this is the essence of what Gullah Geechee culture is. And when you are in contact with Gullah Geechee culture, basically this is what Gullah Geechee culture identity confers. Basically, it confers a connection to the literal moment when Africans became Americans in this landscape, in this place, right? And I don't know about you, but that gives me the chills to think about, right? So we used to call it the Low Country, now we call it the Gullah Geechee Coast, and that's a process that came about starting in about 2004, when the Gullah Geechee Coast was identified by the National Trust for Historic Preservation as one of the most endangered historic places in the United States. And so what followed from that was a group of park rangers got together and they created a survey in which they gathered all the information that there was, that you could possibly find on everything that had been written about it, everything that had been said. They conducted interviews, they did environmental surveys, they did everything, right? This is the federal government, right? The federal government is thorough. And so with this, a group of lawmakers led by James Clyburn came together and created the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, a 4-state region from Cape Fear, North Carolina, down to the St. Johns River in Jacksonville, and about 50 miles inland, you know, all the way up to the coastal plain. If the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor were a state, it would be the size and population of Maryland, right? So, and the wonderful thing that was accomplished through this process, many things were accomplished, but the big thing was that everybody who had a museum, everybody who had a historic site suddenly had a home. The Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor, Heritage Corridor has a board, and it has a structure that allows you to do tours and conduct heritage tourism. That's like the sort of like the whole point. But so just to recap really quick, so that's important about the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor. That's why we call it the Gullah Geechee Coast now instead of just the Low Country. So these three cultures coming together, we're the second in time. Africans enter the Low Country, South Carolina, in 1670, right? And then that's when that foothold is established. But we're the largest, and so I want to introduce you a couple of some ideas, just to help you think about, you know, how I conceive of the importance of this culture, and just give you something to carry you away. The first is, I want you to think about hunger. Hunger. The enslaved were certainly hungry, right? But they were producing food for the nation, and not just the nation. They were producing it for the globe. So Gullah Geechee culture fed the nation physically, and it also feeds it spiritually. So I want to run through a couple of slides really quickly, just to talk about those ideas, and then we can talk about the book. Okay. So here, this is a riddle that used to be told when I was a kid, and this is the answer to the riddle. Does anybody know the question? Okay. I hope it's not too loud with the train going by. So the question is, why are Charlestonians like the Chinese? The answer is, they eat rice, they worship their ancestors, and they speak a language that's hard to understand. So that was the saying when I was growing up. Of course, it's not true, right? It's a myth, right? It's a myth that helps to explain away the uncomfortable truth that Charlestonians do these things because they had proximity to Africans, right? But the practical effect of that myth is to explain away the African-American connection, the African connection, and thereby the African-American connection to rice, which in effect denies us our inheritance. Well, and heritage too. It denies not just African Americans, but South Carolinians as well, because this is a part of our heritage and we don't understand it properly. The truth is, people all over the New World eat rice because of the African slave trade. This map that we're looking at here, you can see there's a very small West African rice center that is, the Senegambia region. Senegal and the Gambia River, the Senegal and Gambia rivers, which were among the tidal rivers where the form of rice cultivation that we practice in the United States was born, in South Carolina was born. And this map is kind of fascinating because what it actually shows is a very small area of Africa that's being strip mined of people who have knowledge of a specific technology that is worth a lot of money, right? So these are people who know how to grow rice. They know the technology because it's a very precise technology that involves building a hydraulic network of fields next to rivers that can be flooded and drained with the action of the moon and the tides, right? And that is the form of rice cultivation that is practiced here in the United States. Now, yeah. So yeah, we've got, so let's see, let me see what they're doing. So what I want to, I'm sorry, I just took my microphone off and didn't realize it. Let me put this back here. How's that? Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Africans enslaved in the New World likely began planting the crop for their own consumption, right? As can be seen from the map, because you can see the diaspora of eating rice, eating and growing rice. Yeah. The methods, materials, and even the tools used to grow rice in South Carolina were distinct from those in Asia and identical to those used in West Africa. Indeed, the consumption of rice in the U.S. itself is actually the most powerful of African survivals. It's a survival of the African past in the American present. And it's one that we mostly are unaware of, People in the Low Country are all about the rice, right? But so we are very into the rice. Other people, may eat rice, but they don't know why. They don't know. They don't understand this background. They don't understand this history. So this myth that Carolina gold came to South Carolina from Madagascar and that this one low country planter learned to grow it from the Chinese, I mean, well, it's actually kind of absurd. It's kind of nonsensical when you think about it, right? So that's one myth that I wanted to kind of like talk about. And it's one that you'll still hear some of the people in those carriage tours. Some of them still tell that story. Most of them are like catching on now. We don't tell that one anymore. So the other one, this is actually a truth. Gullah Geechee culture is rice culture. This is a 100% truth. But this truth is used to support the myth that Gullah Geechee culture was dying out, right? That it was this primitive culture, it was backwards, it was being left behind by the modern world, and the people were in the process of vanishing from the face of the earth. So, I mean, they've been saying that since slavery, basically, and, we're still here. But still, that was a compelling narrative, and that narrative was pegged to the fact that Gullah Geechee culture was supposed to be on the Sea Islands. I mean, everybody's heard that, right? That it's Sea Island culture? Well, that's absolutely true. But guess what? Rice wasn't grown on Sea Islands. Cotton was grown on Sea Islands. Luxury grade cotton, very expensive grade of cotton, not rice. Where was rice grown? South Carolina's rice rivers. Rice is river culture. So while you can say people who are like living in, sort of like small sea islands that are like losing population, that of course it might look like the culture is dying. But the culture was networked all through South Carolina, as you can see. The rice rivers, there were 11, the Waccamaw, the Pee the Black, the Sanpit, the Santee, the Cooper, the Ashley, the Edisto, the Ashepoo, the Combahee, the Savannah, the music of those names, just amazing, right? And here's what they did in their heyday. So let's just go through the timeline really quickly. Rice production is introduced in 1685. By 1700, they're producing 400,000 pounds annually, right? It doesn't take long. 1710, 1.5 million. By 1740, there's a great leap forward, 66 million pounds annually. So this means they have to bring in people in masses in order to do this. And not only that, this is virgin land. It has to be cleared. The fields have to be, the canals have to be done. They have to build, the system of gates and trunks that allow, that block the water from flowing through and that allow it in to flood the fields. So there's this tremendous level of work that is done to create this world of rice. 1860, 120 million tons annually. We're not just feeding the nation, we're feeding the world. In fact, according to the Carolina Rice Kitchen, which is Karen Hess's history of rice, the Emperor of China was eating Carolina Gold rice. They were not eating local rice, they were buying our rice. So it's astonishing. But unfortunately, it was not sustainable. Within 30 years of the Civil War, production was cut by 75%. You just couldn't, people wouldn't do it if they weren't coerced. The work was killing. You're working in the heat with mosquitoes, alligators, snakes, malaria, all kinds of infectious diseases. Nobody would do it unless they were coerced. And the planters wouldn't pay. By 1919, down to 4 million, right? And then in 1923, rice cultivation ceases completely because there's a series of hurricanes starting in 1891, increasing in severity, but there's a series again in 1921 and 1923, and the one in 1923 completely demolishes most of the fields. One of the planters that I studied describes watching the water, the trunks have been destroyed, the sluice gates have been destroyed, and he describes watching the water just basically take over, comes in, and there's nobody left to do any of the repairs. So rice cultivation is effectively ended, for about 75 years in South Carolina. So yeah, the interesting, so one of the things that I find fascinating is that all that's left in terms of memory, are the houses that Rice built. And they tell a very partial narrative. The memory of Rice and the story of Rice are completely filtered through images like this. And, I don't know why you did that. Completely filtered through images like this. And no, it's beauty, right? But it's a guilty beauty in that we can't ever mention the source of the wealth that created it. So what I want you guys to do the next time you see an image of or visit Middleton Place is to recognize that those pretty lakes were dug out by men with shovels, right? And they're not for show. They are connected to the hydraulic system that floods and drains the rice fields. This is just rice that's articulated on a grand landscape. I mean, the wealth that is required to do this is astounds. And the next time you're driving in the Low Country, driving over a bridge, and maybe you look over your shoulder and you think you're driving, you think it's just a creek. But then you notice that the edge of that creek is straight as a ruler. That's the work of man, not of nature, right? And when you're flying over the Low Country, right, you're flying into Charleston and Savannah, you can look out over the marsh and you can see lines like these carved into the earth. and know that the work of men mostly working between 1700 and 1740, because that's how they achieved that great leap forward in production from, 4 million pounds of rice to 66 million tons of rice. Doing this, carving lines into the earth that can still be seen hundreds of years later from, 10,000 feet in the air. So think about this. The amount of earth moved to create the rice fields has been estimated to have been greater than the amount of earth moved to build the pyramids. And it was done in a much shorter period of time, right? Less than a century. So when I think about this, I am deeply humbled every time I think about it. And so that is one of the ways that Gullah Geechee people fed America, and that also brings me to the second way that Gullah Geechee people have fed America. And that is we fed America's souls. This is a song that you'll all know, I'm sure. Yeah, that's been in this, oops, sorry, it keeps starting over. That's been in, maybe I'll just talk over it. How about that? Yeah, this is the Moving Star Hall Singers from Johns Island. Come on, where are you thinking? Where's that, baby? Go back. Moving Star Hall Singers from Johns Island. And singing Been in the Storm So Long. Let's make sure, come back here. Come back. So you guys know that sound. You guys, people sing like that in country songs, churches all over the state of South Carolina. That song, that soul deep expression of feeling, emotion, sometimes it's joy, sometimes it's pain. It's that soul music that allows you to transcend and carry on. We've had this very kind of, pop-y kind of notion of what soul music is. But this was soul music that saved people's souls, that allowed them gave them someplace to put the pain that was inside of them, right? And then to let it out, to transcend it so that they could be free. So and this image, quickly I want to just say is a painting that was done in the 1700s, late 1700s, by a gentleman named John Rose, and it's supposed to, sorry for the resolution, it didn't come out very sharp, but it's supposed to depict a plantation in Beaufort in the late 1700s, and they're dancing, right? Because that is what this music did. It gave them joy. It helped them to live. It helped them to endure. I'm reminded of Thomas Jefferson's quote. He was always talking about, he couldn't understand why the slaves would, work all day, work hard all day, and then sing all night. They'd stay up and sing all night. Those songs were helping them to bear what they were living through. And those songs still help us today. So I just want to talk a little bit about, because I think it's interesting, this is part of what I teach in my African American Studies class. I think it's interesting for people who, we know that there are African, elements in American culture. It's interesting to know what those are so that you can kind of compare and contrast, right? So there are 6. Belief in a supreme deity who's perfect and pure, but distant and unapproachable. Religions are often accompanied by a belief in a pantheon of lesser deities that are powerful but human and flawed, who serve as intermediaries. They're honored through libations, offerings, and sacrifice. Communal ceremonies involving ritualistic dancing and drumming, here's the key, in which participants seek a trance state through which Ashe, which is a spiritual power, the power of the gods, descends upon the individual, resulting in an ecstatic state of union with the divine. This is what people were seeking in those, in those after work spaces, where instead of going to bed, instead of just, getting ready for the next day, they danced and they sang, and they gathered and prayed and did ring shouts, away from the eyes of the masters. Divinatory rites, casting cowries and other forms of fortune telling are a routine part of everyday life. There's no prohibition on it. It's considered a perfectly acceptable way of finding out what the will of the gods is. And these root doctors, as we call them here, act as healers, herbalists, and hold positions of respect in the community. Okay, a few more, and then we'll move on. Here are more differences, right? Here is a belief in the ensoulment and sacredness of all natural phenomenon. Animals, rivers, springs, waterfalls, you name it. None are dumb creation, all are possessed of Ashe. They can be spirits, or they can also be messengers of God. Belief in the cyclical nature of reality. The living stand between the ancestors and the unborn. And through proper attention to ceremonies and divinatory messages, one can communicate with them. Lack of belief in a Satan or a devil. African traditional religions do not personify evil and located outside the individual. Instead, they recognize that all beings, human and divine, contain aspects of light and dark. Trickster deities they have, and those are often confused by Westerners with demons, but they don't believe in demons. The cosmologies of these religions are intricately interwoven with nature and the rhythms of the agricultural year. Much of this could not be replicated in the New World, but in the Gullah Geechee Coast, a great deal of it was. So given this intricate spiritual and religious structure, why did the enslaved convert in the first place? Why did they become Christian? And did that mean abandonment of their previous beliefs? And here's the big question, did they convert to Christianity, or did they convert Christianity to their spiritual needs? Right? There is a good deal of evidence that the form of religion that African Americans and Gullah Geechees practiced in slavery is different from the religion that the whites were practicing. So why did they convert? This is an image from George Whitefield, the famous evangelist of the Great Awakening. But this is in England, so everybody's white. So here's the thing, from 1619 to about roughly 1790, only a small minority of slaves received religious instruction because there were linguistic barriers. Masters didn't want to do it, right? There were no missionaries who were like working in those fields, right? And also there was this perception of conversion as just memorizing, which is the way it was taught. But then during the Great Awakening, this new form of emotional evangelical witness begins, and Africans began moving into Methodism first, Episcopalianism, and then finally into the Baptist faith. So these gatherings of the Great Awakening are huge gatherings of people of every age, race, and condition. And the Methodist preachers who are leading the way are preaching that all are equal in the eyes of God. That was an attractive message for the enslaved. So masters are feeling the pressure, and they begin providing religious instruction. But, their idea of religious instruction is basically this sort of slave catechism. What did God make you for? To make a crop. What is the meaning of thou shalt not commit adultery? To serve our heavenly Father and our earthly master, obey our overseer, and not steal anything. This is actually an actual quote from from some of the teaching that slaves were receiving. So, you know, when you're getting this message, the response is going to be like, yeah, come on, are you kidding me? And this is the phrase. This is the old, you know, sort of proverb, the African-American proverb. Got one mind for the master to see, got another for what I know is me. People knew that, right? So here, the Christian faith, but here's the thing. The people who are trying to teach this version of religion, the thing that they don't understand is that the enslaved were already, in large part, familiar with the Bible before they arrived in the New World. 40% of the people trafficked here to South Carolina were from the Congo. Well, the Congo was converted to Christianity in the 1450s by the Portuguese. The Congo is a Christian nation, so the Congolese enslaved certainly knew the Bible. And then another 40% came from the Senegambia region, which was largely Muslim, but they were people of the book, an Abrahamic religion. So they too were familiar with the stories in the Bible and already had pre-existing interpretations of what the Bible meant. So Christianity becomes a site of resistance and liberation for the enslaved. On holidays and Sundays, they could be free. When enslaved people could learn to be preachers and practice as preachers, they could practice a form of freedom. Spirituals were coded messages in which they shared their dreams and hopes for freedom with each other in plain sight of the masters who didn't understand what they were talking about because they just thought they were, you know, saying some nice little religious songs and talking about how content they were. Ring shouts, baptism and conversions, all of these were adapted by the enslaved to their purposes. And the texts that they focused on were Exodus and Galatians, texts that were full of these messages of freedom. The spirituals are a perfect example of hiding in plain sight. The slave masters read spirituals as signs of contentment, but they had their own meaning. When they sang about Satan, they weren't singing about Satan because the Africans didn't believe in Satan. They were singing about the slave master. Babylon was the south. Hell was farther south. Canaan represented freedom. Home was Africa. Heaven was Africa. These were not songs expressing a death wish. These were songs expressing a will to live, right? So I want to end with one of the things that people don't understand is the degree to which many of the songs that we love originated here in South Carolina first. Were first collected, first heard, first done. Classics, of course, Kumbaya. Everybody knows Kumbaya, right? And I always thought, and we just teach it to children, and we don't teach the deeper meaning of that song in general. Michael, row the boat ashore. That's a Gullah Geechee hymn. Down by the riverside. That's a Gullah Geechee hymn. And this one. This is the Harlem Boys Choir singing a song everybody knows. think. Yeah, there we go. I just let it go to the end. Okay. So these are songs that give us the heart to endure. They give us the heart to go on, you know, in unfriendly times. Most of all, they give us the heart to resist injustice, to resist oppression. That is a hunger that the human spirit always has. And the Gullah Geechee culture fed this hunger for the American nation in ways that is not yet acknowledged. And so that's why I hope that my book will help us to understand, you know, our place as African American people, as people who may have Gullah Geechee lineage, as Americans, understand our story better. And so I would love to tell you a little bit more about the book now. I don't really have any slides about it. I just wanted to talk to you about my culture generally. And we can talk about anything you guys want to. We can talk about the book, or we can talk about any questions that you might have about anything that I've said up to now. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, you gotta get this. Let me get this. Oops.
If you have questions or comments, raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you. That way the people at home watching on Facebook or YouTube can hear the question.
Dr. Hamilton, is Gullah and Geechee, those two different things? Can you use them interchangeably?
Oh, yeah.
What's the
so
difference?
I didn't explain, did I? So basically, this is actually how I got interested enough in the top to write the story, because I was in graduate school, of course, in love with literature. And I'm, of course, reading everything I could about Charleston, and all people were talking about was Gullah this and Gullah that, and I was like, what are they talking about? Because we call ourselves Geechees. And so I didn't know. I mean, it was literally not until I heard a Gullah, a recording by a white Gullah recitalist from the 1920s. It was pretty good, actually, that I realized that this is the language of my grandmother and all of my paternal relations, like my entire father's family. And I'm like, they're talking about us. And so that was the moment I realized that scholarship could write about stuff that you know that's as close to you as your grandmother and make it sound completely strange to the point that you don't even recognize it. So basically, Gullah Geechee has come about as a sort of consensus formation because some people use Gullah, like people on the islands, John's Island, you know, Defusky, you know, et cetera, St. Helena Island, they say Gullah. But people in the cities like Charleston and people in Georgia generally use Geechee. So since nobody could figure out which came first, the chicken or the egg, they just kind of slap them together, you know. So that's why they say Gullah Geechee. And Gullah comes from, they think that it is because there's a Gola tribe in Liberia, in the Senegambia, and then there are the Angolas, and Angola, the nation Angola, down in the Congo region. So they think that that's what they started calling each other. There are also tribal names in Africa that resemble Geechee. There's one called the G-I-G-G-I, Geechee, and in the Senegambia region. So that's where they think these things come from.
Enjoyed it all.
Oh, goody.
I would like for you to talk about the religion and how voodoo was a religion and Hollywood decided to twist it into something that it's not.
Okay. So yeah, this is one of the things I could have shown you was a slide that displays the different regions of the New World where traditional African religions are practiced, and there are not voodoo or vaudou, as the Haitians call it, is only one. There's like a dozen of these of these Santeria, Candomblé, Lacumba. You know, there's a whole bunch of them, and they have, and what they have in common is that they are sort of like they are allowed to survive in Catholic nations, right? Because of the worship of the saints. You can basically hide your religion of an African god in plain sight by, you know, lighting a candle to a saint. Like Saint Barbara is the equivalent of Chango, for example. But yeah, so the only voodoo is only practiced, is most practiced by the Yoruba people of West Africa. And the Yoruba, it is a religion of life and worship of the feminine, the procreative principle of the feminine. But because it involves sacrifice, animal sacrifice, is blood, you know, it's blood, and because it involves trance possession, it's just like being slain in the spirit, right? But it's in a different context. So people dance and drum because this is the difference between the way Africans view God and the way Europeans viewed God. God, you go to a church to be with God in European traditions. In African traditions, you make God happen through the practice of worship. So dancing, drumming, singing, praying, you know, this emotional and ecstatic worship style makes God come down among the congregation, and that creates the act of worship. It's participatory, right? But Hollywood has taken these, you know, these elements and combined it with European fears of the devil, European fears of black people, and, you know, fears of sex, and turned it into this really, you know, crazy thing that has nothing to do with what the voodoo religion. For example, we have turned zombies into this, you know, this giant cultural thing. But the zombie tradition in the United States is completely different from what zombies were in Haiti. In Haiti, the fear of the zombie was of being brought back from the dead and forced to work for all eternity for an evil sorcerer, right? It was a fear that comes out of the plantation regime, where you don't even get to rest after you're dead. You were reanimated and forced to labor for eternity, right? And we have turned that into, you know, The Walking Dead. So I think that I think the arrival of people, you know, like black filmmakers doing horror, is probably going to have is probably going to help to alleviate the sensationalism and the craziness surrounding voodoo. But I hope that helps to answer your question. But right now we're kind of in a mess. We're kind of in a mess where, you know, these stereotypes about voodoo are being used to, you know, to demonize real people and causing you know, real pain and harm to communities. It's not just funny movies or you know, scary movies. It's scary reality. Mm-hmm.
I attended school in Sumter County, and back when I went from upstate, but I was told that you didn't, the kids down there, you didn't say that they were Geechees. That was an offensive term to them. Is it still that way today?
Well, it was an insult, right? I mean, I remember moving to Virginia, and one of my friends who was, you know, a very good friend, you know, when she wanted to pull my leg, she would just go, "You ain't nothing but a rice-eating Geechee." And, you know, so it was used as an insult. I had to ask, you know, older, you know, my friends' older siblings what it was all about, but yeah. Yeah, it was considered a terrible insult. It meant country, it meant, you know, backwards, it meant primitive, it meant, you know, dumb. And so I think that's, you know, that's changed, right? There's still linguistic prejudice, but now there's a cultural revival movement that has been, you know, sparked by the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor. And people are starting, you know, I was raised to be ashamed of my speech. That's why I talk like the network news, right? My parents sent me to, you know, to speech, you know, people so that they would, you know, straighten me out and get rid of my Gullah accent. But, you know, and I can still do it when I'm at home, you know, when I'm surrounded by people, you know, yeah, and I pick up the tones and the sounds, yeah, but just on my own, not really. And that was because we were raised to feel shame. And in fact, the first chapter that of the book deals with the shame of that linguistic prejudice, which is actually one of the few socially acceptable prejudices there are. We feel perfectly comfortable making fun of people's accents. And so the people that I use to sort of illustrate that, it's an autobiographical chapter in part. I talk about myself, I talk about, you know, my life growing up in Charleston. But the person that I use to illustrate it is Clarence Thomas. Because Clarence Thomas is from Savannah. He's from a little Gullah Geechee settlement called Pinpoint on the Moon River. And he did not move into the city until he, you know, was, I guess about 10 years old, because, you know, he was playing with matches and he burned his house down. And he and his mother and his siblings had to move into town with his grandfather. And people made such fun of him at his all-black high school. They made such fun of him that it clearly it has had a lifelong mark on him. He, of course, his hostility to black, you know, politics and black causes is well known. And that's, I think, the unfortunate result of the nickname that he had when he was in high school, which was ABC, America's Blackest Child. No one will admit to calling him that, you know, but everybody knows that that was what he was called, right? So those scars, right? Be careful how you treat people, right? Mm-hmm. That shame, he's often said the reason he doesn't speak in oral arguments is he's still self-conscious about his Gullah Geechee accent. So yeah, the book is structured as where the first 2 chapters are basically to introduce you to this world. We talk about the language, we talk about the landscape, and we talk about the lineages, the people, you know, who were brought here to make this rice and to make this world. And then the second part of the book, I zero in on a particular period, because I'm a literary scholar, right? So I'm interested in the period of the 1920s, because that's the period of the Harlem Renaissance, and it's also the period of what we call the Charleston Renaissance now. All of these artists on 2 sides of the color line who are both inspired by the same culture. You know, some of the major artists of the Harlem Renaissance are inspired by Gullah Geechee culture, though they are, and some of them are from, like, Florida, produces James Weldon Johnson and Zora Neale Hurston, who are 2 of the major figures. James Weldon Johnson wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing. And he and his brother did Broadway shows, produced Broadway shows, produced and wrote Broadway shows. His brother was also a band leader in Europe. You know, these are people, amazing people. So it's an amazing period. And so that, those 4 chapters are about, I talk about visual art, I talk about music, Porgy and Bess particularly, the opera Porgy and Bess, and the spirituals. And so I look at that period of artistic creativity because I wanted to create a canon right? And a story that other scholars could come behind me and either flesh that period out or bring it forward in time. Because some of the most significant books that are written about the Gullah Geechee Coast come out during the great sort of renaissance of Black women's writing in the 1980s and the 1990s. And so that whole story remains to be told too. But I'm sorry, I'm kind of far afield from your question about it being an insult. But yeah, thank you for asking that.
I have a question.
Sure.
So how is it believed that rice came to South Carolina? If you said, I think we're running out of something. Anyway, I should say, so if it's believed that it was actually the enslaved who brought that tradition here, how is it believed the enslaved got the rice here to plant?
Well, so one of the theories that I have heard is that people could hide things in their hair, right? You don't have very many places that, but you can hide seed. You can hide seed in your hair. But they probably didn't have to do that, right? Because the people who are kidnapping them are getting food over there to feed them, right? They eat rice, so they're probably bringing rice with them to feed them. Once they get here, the enslaved can squirrel the rice away on their persons and they can plant it so that they can have something that they know that they can eat, with them. And the planters noticed, hey, this seems to grow well here. And so there was a plant, Dr. Henry Woodward. Dr. Henry Woodward in 1685 does get rice seed, and he tries to grow it, but he tries to grow it like in ponds. He doesn't know how to grow it. So it doesn't really work. Somewhere between 1685 and 1691, people get the right assistance. They say, we need to look at how these guys are doing this over in Africa. And that transition is made from, trying to do it in dry soil or trying to do it with ponds that don't drain, and that transition is made to the African technology.
I'm always intrigued because people from the north tend to eat potatoes and we eat rice. And I think it's intriguing.
And in the upstate, it's corn, right? Everybody has their own little staple, right? And grits, my mama, grits. But my father could eat rice with every meal. I mean, literally. He'll eat it for breakfast.
Dr. Hamilton, can you talk about the Gullah celebration that's getting ready to come up down in the Beaufort area, Hilton Head area?
I'm sorry, I don't know which one you're talking about. There are so many.
The one that's happening in March, and also the Gullah Festival. Are you familiar?
Well, the one that this weekend I'm going down to the Savannah, and then I'm coming back up to the International Gullah Geechee Festival in Conway. But I don't really know about that particular festival. But they do good festivals. I do know that. I enjoy going to them.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really interesting. I'm assuming there's no other questions?
I hope I didn't bludgeon you with too many facts, but thank you guys. Thank you for your attention. It was great.
Thank you so much.
And I'm educated. Okay, I can't.